I want to talk to you about this. It's a blank sheet of paper. No words, no pictures, just blank. But blank sheets of paper like this one have become really powerful symbols of protest in a country known for restricting speech. And of course, I'm talking about China and the wave of protests that have hit it, in large part because of the country's zero COVID policy. Now, it's the government enforcing strict rules in the name of keeping COVID under control by controlling people, their movements, whether they can open their businesses. There's mandatory testing, millions of tests a day, not to mention days of quarantine, even if you're simply just a close contact of someone with COVID. Now, where do you put all those people? Well, the lucky ones stay home, but many others go to government facilities, like this one in Guangzhou. They're massive, makeshift sites for what are essentially stacked, tiny houses purpose-built to keep people in. Sometimes entire apartment buildings are locked down over a single case of the virus. And just imagine 3 years under these draconian restrictions. People are frustrated, they're furious, and they're just done. And they started pushing back. Now, the chant at the end there, no more lockdowns, we want freedom. The protest started after an apartment building fire in a city in the far western region of Xinjiang. 10 people died, and it's alleged that some of the building's exits were sealed off because of a COVID lockdown, preventing firefighters from rescuing everyone. And soon, it wasn't even just COVID restrictions that people were protesting against. Just listen to what reporter Patrick Falk told CBC News Network.
There is anger over China's zero COVID policy, but also some of the slogans that we're hearing protesters in China chant right now are really remarkable. They are a direct challenge to China's leadership in many ways. We've heard people chanting, bring down the Communist Party, bring down President Xi Jinping. As we know, there is very little room for dissent in China under President Xi, so these people are doing so at great risk.
Now, we mentioned it before, and Patrick mentioned it there. China isn't exactly known for allowing dissent. So how do you express yourself when you have no freedom of expression? Well, it comes back to this. And it's a very deliberate act. Here's how Victor Shi, the chair of China and Pacific Relations at the University of San Diego, explained it on The National.
They're using it as a symbol of the complete censorship that they're facing. Whenever they post anything controversial online, it gets censored. So they're showing that, at the last resort, they can still hold up a piece of blank paper, even though it doesn't express anything specifically. It does convey a sense of desperation as they are completely censored by the Chinese government.
Now, here's the interesting thing. This isn't the first time protesters have made a statement with blank paper. Earlier this year, when anti-war protests swept Russia, this video circulated on social media. Now, Xi and others, too, were reportedly arrested for holding blank signs. Then there's Hong Kong. The city was gripped by pro-democracy protests in 2019, and people put these Post-it notes, like these, with messages to show their support. Then a new law came into effect outlawing protest slogans. And here's what people did in response. You can see the Post-its on this cafe wall, still there, but this time just left blank. Now, those demonstrations in Hong Kong were largely silenced by the pandemic. Hong Kong put tough restrictions in place at the beginning of 2020 to curb transmission of the virus. But that just brings us right back to where we started. So what's happening in China now? Well, some major cities have actually walked back some of the harshest COVID-0 restrictions. In Guangzhou and Chengdu, both lockdowns and testing have relaxed. And one Beijing newspaper reported that people in the city with mild COVID can now quarantine at home rather than in government camps. But Even as China eases up, there's no indication when COVID zero actually ends. And the country's still dealing with another major problem: vaccination, especially of the elderly. Less than half of over 80-year-olds are fully vaxxed with a booster shot. And China still doesn't allow foreign-made mRNA vaccines. Its own vaccines developed at home, less effective. So COVID zero restrictions aren't just controversial, they may be necessary. One study even modeled what would happen if China suddenly lifted all of its COVID measures. And it suggested that hospitalizations could skyrocket as high as 15 patients per available bed. As for protesters and those blank pages, well, the government is cracking down. Teng Biao is a human rights advocate and lawyer. He was arrested several times in China for dissent and now lives in exile in the US.
The Communist Party would use violence to crush the movement, the revolution. And I heard this morning that the detained protesters were brutally tortured, and that would the authorities will arrest more protesters, and many of them would get sentences, maybe 2 years or 5 years or longer.
It's been almost 2 weeks since the protests first broke out, but around the world, the sentiment has spread like wildfire, from Tokyo to New Delhi to Berlin to Montreal. And at these protests, blank paper, a symbol of support with a clear message, saying everything by saying nothing.